In this video you will learn how to create this device inside Ableton Live that lets you create multiple ambient soundscapes without actually composing any notes. In fact, all you need to compose is one static MIDI note. So you can, for example, start with some super spacious ambient soundscape. Move to something rhythmical. And slide into some dark drone. All inside this one device and with just one static MIDI note. And this is definitely going to be some in-depth tutorial, so I can't cover this topic in just 5 minutes. But in my opinion, it's totally worth the work and the patience. So if you're up for that, let's jump right into it. Hi and welcome to this video. My name is Yannis and this is a topic I've been super excited about for a very long time because I often use music for meditation sessions, especially with my Vermona Performer synthesizer. It's just a super soothing experience to sit down and have some setups that allow me to create music directly without actually spending any time composing. And I try to imitate the same kind of workflow inside Ableton Live with this one device. So first we're going to create a MIDI track and then we are going to perform our one compositional task of this video, which is creating one long MIDI note. Possibly C2, but honestly it doesn't really matter. For the sound source you have different options. So you can, for example, use a sample, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to load a sampler to the track and I'm going to use a sample from my own Vermona Performer sample pack. But you can use any sample you find under samples in Ableton and maybe you have your own favorite sample, so you just drag it here. Alternatively, you can also use any synth. So if you have a favorite plugin, you can totally use it. If you want to use the Ableton synths, it's also great. So for example, Analog is a synth I really like. And I want to show you one particular setting that works well for what we're going to create. So all you need to do here is select one oscillator, possibly a sawtooth wave, but you can also choose other waveforms. The filter you can bring down to a setting like this. And for the envelope, it's something direct with a mild decay and some proper release, and I just used the same settings for the amp as well. And applying a little bit of LFO1 at some slow rate like 0.9 to the pitch adds some warm analog flavor to the sound. Now, whatever you're using, we're already going to create a rack, which is this final device that you saw in the intro. And you can simply do so by pressing Command and G. And then Ableton creates some instrument rack and you get those macros and we need all 16 of them. I mean, I start doing this now already because it kind of makes sense because we want to control the basic sound parameters. And as you saw in the intro, my sound parameters were here, like macro 9 till 12. And I used it for the cutoff frequency. So you can simply click on the frequency. At the synthesizer, it would also be just the filter frequency. And assign this to 9. I leave out the resonance, I just increase it a little bit, and this is just some basic sound setting now. And the attack goes to macro 10, the decay goes to macro 11, and also the release, because I kind of like to keep them on the same macro to save some space for macros. And the sustain goes to macro 12. And also we have to assign the same controls to the filter envelope because this one is important. It adds some sort of movement to our sound, so you can just increase the amount a little, maybe to around 40. And then we assign the attack to the attack macro, the decay to the decay release macro and also the release, and the sustain again to the sustain macro, because if those are not connected and you change the sounds with the rack, you get some kind of messy results. It's also a good idea to already give them names. So this could be like cutoff frequency, attack, decay, release, and sustain. Also, I recommend to add a little bit of some LFO modulation to the pitch because it just makes the sound a little more warm or analog, if you want to say so. 1 hertz is actually fine, and just with a little amount. So you get this. Also, I think I transposed it down because otherwise it was 1 octave higher than the actual note that would usually appear at this place. And then you can just use those first knobs here for setting some basic sounds, so it's enjoyable to use for all the future steps. Actually, I just checked, the amount was 32 for the filter envelope, and also what is really cool is the random panning, so you get a little bit of movement with every note that gets triggered. And if you have some MIDI controller, you can also already assign those 4 knobs to the controls you want to use for it. So here I have my Fader Fox. It's actually perfect because it has exactly 16 knobs. And also I have some preset that automatically lets me control the first device. But if that's not the case for you, you can just go into the MIDI mapping mode by pressing Command M. And then you just click on the knob you want to assign, and then you move the knob that you're using for controlling it. So if this would be this knob, you see this MIDI note appearing, and now you would just move this knob and actually you can change that parameter. Since we're making some ambient music, we definitely need some reverb, and actually I feel like this device would work with a reverb that is on 100% all the time, but still it's nice to get also some drier sounds. And what I particularly liked here was the hybrid reverb of Ableton. So under reverb and resonance, you can find the hybrid reverb. I mean, you can also use any other reverb plugin you like, but somehow I just discovered this one recently and liked it a lot. And these are the settings I picked. So you can see that I have 100% of the algorithm. Otherwise, there's also some convolution reverb. I never looked into that. I somehow just really liked how this one sounded in the shimmer algorithm. And it also lets you add a little bit of the shimmer. So you can just copy those settings or play around with it if you feel like. But this is definitely a setting that is great for ambient soundscapes. We can also already drag it inside the rack because we also want to map some controls to the macros. So in this case, I think dry red is amazing, and I picked macro 15. And also the shimmer is actually great for macro 16. So still I'm going to play with my keyboard here, but you can see how the shimmer just brings in another layer. So this is a kind of solid sonic foundation, so we don't hate the sound right away. Now, of course, the next question is, how do we get some rhythm? Because now I just played with the keyboard a couple of examples, but otherwise we only have this static MIDI clip. And the answer is we need some arpeggiator, which you can find under MIDI effects. And this one is great for just adding some first type of rhythm to the sound. Maybe you notice while we're on 16th notes, they are still quite slow. And if you check my tempo, I changed the tempo to 26, which seems like some ridiculously slow tempo. But the problem is with the arpeggiator that the slowest rate is quarter notes. Actually, no, that's not quarter notes, it's whole notes. But still, whole notes are rather fast if you have a tempo of, for example, 100, because then you just can't go slower. And especially with those wide ambient soundscapes, sometimes you just want very slow tempos. So I figured out that 26 is actually a pretty good tempo here, because we can go super slow. I'm not going to demonstrate now the whole bar because it takes a long time for it to be triggering again. But even the fastest tempo is still kind of interesting to listen to. You can use it sometimes for certain types of sound effects. So changing the rate of the arpeggiator basically sets the tempo of the overall sound or patch we create. So the tempo I mapped to macro number 1. And actually, the arpeggiator needs to be inside the instrument rack, of course. And then you can map the rate to macro number 1. Also, it's kind of a good moment to already add some colors, and I like to color code. So for example, for those 4 controls for the synthesizer, I like to use the same color. I think I use something pinkish. So you can use whatever color, of course. So I know those are for controlling the sound. And for tempo, we can pick another color. So for example, something blue. Actually, I changed it over to this green tone because that's also the color I used in the original device you saw me use in the intro. And now we have rhythm, but it's always the same note. So still it sounds incredibly boring. And there's another MIDI effect that we can use for triggering different pitches and notes, which is called, under MIDI effects, random. So we can drag it in here. And actually the default setting already tells the generator to generate 12 different choices because there are 12 tones per octave. So if I increase the chance to 100%, it means like we all the time now create completely randomized melodies using all the 12 pitches inside one octave. And while sometimes, coincidentally, those melodies can sound cool, they are completely out of context now. So they are not connected to any type of harmony or actually tonality or scale, which brings us to the next effect, which is called scale. And here you find different types of scales. And I mean, you can basically pick any, but it's nice to actually start with basics. And I just really like the natural minor mode. So that's the one I'm going to pick here, and you drag it behind the random effect. And the order is really important here because first we have the rhythm, because if the random would be in front of the rhythm, it would actually randomize this one static MIDI note. And so the arpeggiator then would still only send out one note per bar that is generated by random. And also it's important that the scale comes behind the randomizer, because if it's in front of the randomizer, then it still randomizes through no scale plugin. So really watch out for the order here. And now all notes we have will it still sound super random, but it's connected to some actual tonality. And if I increase the scale, you will see that we still have 3 choices, but they are spread out more throughout the scale, because it means that in between the 3 choices, there's a larger space, so we get larger intervals. I switched this back to 12 and 1 because I just want to have the most basic melody generator. And we still have the problem that the melodies sound super generic because it's the same rhythm all the time. I mean, we can change the tempo, but there are no gaps. And without gaps, rhythms sound super generic. And there's a very cool trick we can apply. It's a little outside of the box and might also seem a little abstract and complicated, but you can do it, you can bear with me, and I promise that it's really worth knowing this trick because it can help you in many situations for making music more interesting and to adding some generative, exciting vibe. And what we have to do here is that we have to go to the sample and we have to right click and create a group, or again press Command G. So we create a sub instrument rack or subgroup inside the already existing instrument rack. So that's actually possible. You can group and group and group again. So the only important thing here is to not get confused by all the different groups and by all the different devices. And it's also good to know that once you double click on a device, you can actually make it smaller. So right now we don't need the scale, we don't need the random, we don't need the arpeggiator, we don't need all the instrument rack. We can just make it a little smaller and focus on whatever we're working on right now. So now we have some little sub-instrument rack, and the instrument rack has chains, and it's basically what you see here right now. There's just one chain, and you can create a new one by right-clicking and clicking create chain. Actually here it's still in German, but in English it says create chain. And if you open the chain menu now, you see this graphic. So this one is called chain selector, so you can move this little icon here on top. And then you can set a range for those different chains. So if I select this range, for example, it would mean as soon as the chain selector is in the range of this instrument, it would select the instrument, but as soon as it's out of the range, it would not trigger the instrument anymore. And there could, for example, be another instrument that gets triggered. So you can also create a set list this way by having 10 different presets, and just song by song, you move the chain selector to the next preset. There are actually various applications. And for our example, we're going to distribute the range in a way like this. So the majority of the part is filled by our sampler or the synth, whatever you're using. And then there's a little part in the end. And now we need to go to the audio effects, and under modulators, you find some effect called LFO. And this one we're going to load into the instrument rack, but actually it's going to be behind this instrument rack that we just created. So you have to make sure that it's not here. It actually needs to be here outside of the instrument rack, maybe just next to the reverb. And the LFO is a modulation tool that you can use for modulating all parameters inside the DAW. So you just map it, and if you would, for example, map it to the volume, it would mean that with this type of waveform, you have some sort of modulation, and you can apply this to anything. It makes Ableton basically some almost modular system, if you think about it in this way. And here we're going to assign the LFO to the chain selector. So you see that it starts moving around, and we need to change some more settings in order to make it work. So first we need to sync this to the rhythm, and it should be some rather fast tempo, like 30-second notes. And now it's a sine wave, so it always moves in the same pattern, but the LFO also has something called random. And now it sends out random values, and you can see sometimes it actually jumps out of the range of our sound. And this means if we play the sound that we have some gaps. And let's make it some more obvious example by having a larger range for the offsets, or where we don't get the trigger, so you hear more clearly what happens. So that's actually pretty amazing, and there's another knob that is incredibly helpful here, which is the offset knob, because this one we can map to the macros of the instrument rack and control the amount of gaps. So if I move the offset all the way to the left side, you see it only moves in the range where we have notes. So this would sound like before, where you get all triggers, and sometimes you want to have this option. And if I move it all the way to the right, we don't have any trigger at all. So then you can just fine tune this knob, and maybe at this setting get a few triggers but not many, and this setting would mean lots of triggers but still some gaps, and you have all the positions in between to kind of fine tune. And I really, really like this technique. So let's map it to the macro. And I think I used macro 2 for that, or macro 3. Let me check quickly. Yeah, so the gaps I had on macro 3. So now if we go back to our main rack, you see offset, and I actually called it gaps, but you can come up with whatever name you prefer. And I gave it the same color as the synced rate, because this is all about the note creation. So the rhythm, the gaps, stuff like that. Now, unfortunately, I realized a small mistake. You see, the macros for the synth engine are grayed out, so they are not connected anymore, which is because we created a new rack, and I kind of did it the other way around when I was preparing this video, but now I wanted to be smart and change the order, but I forget that once I make a new rack, you have to make new macro assignments. So actually that means we need to go to the sampler once more. I'm sorry for that. And you need to map attack, decay, release, and the filter once more. And now it will first map those to the macros of the newly built rack that we use for the rhythm gaps, and afterwards we have to assign it to the main rack. So, but actually this is also a good exercise on seeing how all those racks, groups and stuff work, but yeah, I didn't think of this. So we can map the frequency for now just to macro number 1. And the attack, let's pick 2. The decay is going to be 3, release also 3, and sustain 4. And we have to do the same again for the filter envelope. So the attack, the decay, release, same button, and sustain. And then once you're at those macros of the internal instrument rack, you can again map filter frequency to cutoff frequency to the main rack, attack to the attack knob. This one is going to be, well, why is it there out of a sudden? Decay, release, and macro 4 was the sustain. And now we have them here again. There are some more useful MIDI effects I used. So for example, there's one called note length. You can drag it in behind the arpeggiator. The arpeggiator should always be first. That's important. And then you can map the length to macro number 2, which is also what I did in this rack you saw in the intro, because the arpeggiator sends out rather short notes. And if you can change the note length, you can actually make them longer and also have some more orchestral, slow attack type sounds. I also like to add a pitch effect, and it needs to be kind of next to behind the note length. And it can stay at 0, but I like to map it to macro number 4 and give it the same color again, because this lets you just change the range, because otherwise we always stay in the same range. Also be known that you can define the range for all those knobs, because right now they all kind of fill out the full spectrum. And for example, for the pitch, I don't think I need to go up 128 semitones. So if you click on map and open the left side menu, you can just reduce the pitch, for example. So here I could say I want to have 3 octaves I can go down and 3 octaves I can go up. So it would look like this, 36 semitones plus and minus, and then it's probably a little easier to control. Another cool thing I like for tone variety is adding another random effect and changing the setting to scale 12 and choices 1, which means sometimes it will add some octave and the chance could be just 15%, 16%. I find this really pleasing, so just listen to the melody and see if you can sometimes spot the note going 1 octave higher than it usually would. This, for example. Now, maybe you also feel like the melodies are still a little too random. There could be more focus on some sort of compositional feeling, or at least on some more dedicated tone control. And one option would be, with the random effect that is creating the fully random melodies, to map the choices button to, for example, macro 5, and then you can basically lower the choices so you have fewer different notes. That's actually a cool concept. I want to share some other concept with you though that I prefer. It's again a little more outside of the box and a little more complicated, but it's also a little more flexible. So in case you have some very concrete compositional ideas, it's going to be better. And for this one, we're again going to create racks, or one rack, and this time some MIDI effect rack. And we're going to select the scale here, and we're going to again group it. And now we again have some rack inside the rack, this MIDI rack, where we have different chains. And here we're going to create around 5 chains. And if you press Command D, you can just duplicate the same chain a couple of times. That's a little faster. And if you go to the chain selector, you can just move the last one to the end and then right click here and select distribute ranges equally. That's what this means. And then you save some time and it looks like this immediately. Now, those 5 sections you can see as compositional sections. So the first one, I actually decided is just going to be some 1 note sections. So if you move all those little squares to the bottom, it means whenever the chain selector is here, we're just going to trigger a C, or actually whatever note we select with the pitch. No, actually it's always going to be a C. And the second one could then be the same, just for the second part, we can move to the third. So we kind of have 6 times the possibility of the third and 6 times of the root note. And we just move on like this. So inside the rack I prepared for this video, you see the first one is the 1-note melody, then it's 2 options, 3 options. This is like a triad, like root note, minor third, and a 5th. And here you see I also added the charismatic flat 6, which is for minor scales a very important note. And the last one is almost the whole scale, but I think it's like C, D, E flat, F, G. Actually, here I removed the A flat. Interesting. I didn't remember that it's this way. But what I want to show you with this example is that you can see all of those different sections as some compositional block. It could even be different scales. So you could say, okay, the chain selector in the beginning is going to be minor and in the end it's going to be major, if you can control that. But there are all those possibilities. So you can really have basically a compositional concept where one part here is one composition based on a certain scale or tone amount. And in the end, you move the chain selector to, okay, first you need to select macro 1 because we have some internal rack. And then from this internal rack, you map it to, for example, macro 5. And I just realized for pitch, anything connected to pitch, I chose another color. Actually, it was this kind of purple, I think. And this means pitch also has purple because this is about rhythm here. And now it's about pitch, so it needs to be another color. At least for my logic, it helps. And this one I called tone variety. So now if I play a melody and the tone variety is at 0, we only get one note melodies. Or actually octaves. Once I increase the knob, we get more. So if you're, for example, starting with a session, it can feel a bit weird to start with too many notes. So it's actually super cool to start with just one note and slowly increase the amount of choices or notes. And it's a very compositional tool, actually. Another super inspiring thing is to add a chord plugin, because this way you can actually play harmonies. So the chord plugin is also some MIDI effect, and it has to be behind this rack we just created. And also behind the chord effect, there needs to be another instance of scale. So it makes sure that the chords are actually synced to the minor scale. So we again drag a minor scale plugin here. And then we simply assign those 3 chord tone buttons to the macros. So we can basically use those 3 controls for creating different sorts of harmonies. And I just want to show you some cool examples. So something that always sounds really great is if you use fifths, and a fifth is containing 7 semitones. So for adding 2 fifths, it would look like this. And they always give you this immediate Boards of Canada sort of sound. If you want to use some simple chord structures, you can just do 3, I don't type actually, 7 and 10, also sounds great. And I simply called those chord tone 1, 2, 3, I quickly do it. And again, it's purple, so we choose the same color, almost. So we're actually almost done. There's only one thing missing that I used, which is some noise generator. And this is actually really fun to add as well, because in ambient music, it's great to just have some noise, especially when it goes into a large reverb. It just creates this instant ambient sound that you can really enjoy tweaking around, even if you just change the amount of brightness for the noise. And since we have 2 macros remaining, we also have space for that. And here I actually used analog, so we can go back to this instrument rack where we have our sampler, and we can simply add another instance here by choosing instruments and dragging an instance of analog here. And the noise can be triggered all the time, and you have to unselect the oscillators and select the noise. And you have to tweak the settings a little, because you have some different rhythms. The noise always sounds a little different. I just want to share with you what settings I actually used. So the color, I used something more dark. Then the frequency, I actually mapped to the device as well as the volume. We're going to do it in a second. Just check the envelopes here for the attack and decay of the amp and the filter, because that's what's important. And also, I think I added some other note length instance. And actually, yes, because sometimes if there are not enough triggers, the noise is going to be really weak. So I think I added this effect just for making the noise sound more consistent. So it's some constant swoosh and swell, and it's just some constant stream of music if you increase the volume. So let's actually map it. The frequency we have to map first. Actually, it's the internal rack again. So let's use 5 and 6. So the other ones are used already. So then we can map the volume, the frequency to 13 and the volume to 14, and then our rack is actually complete. And for noise, I used something dark. And I think for reverb, I used something more bright. And if you modulate the noise filter, it basically sounds like you're changing the color of the noise. So I actually called this noise color. And this one would be noise volume. And if we move the gap knob all the way to the right, we don't get any melodic trigger, and then we can just focus on the noise for a moment. And that's kind of it. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end. This was definitely a long video, so if you enjoyed it, just take a quick last second to click the like button, and be also warmly invited to share your own experiences with making generative music. If you also want to download the device, you can do it for free. Link is down below in the description. And also there's some option for a few bucks in case you want to say thanks for this video, where I prepared this device with more scales, so you can just use it for Dorian, Mixolydian, Major, Lydian, you name it. You don't have the scale work yourself. I already did it for you, so check it out as well. Apart from that, there's a video here about more generative sequencing techniques in Ableton Live. I think you'll enjoy that one if you enjoyed this video. And otherwise, I just wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create, and hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye.